and it's always a pleasure to have with us Dan Smoot. Thank you very much.
What a wonderful 4th of July this is. I think that writing is the hardest work I ever did. No matter how simple or unimportant the piece I'm trying to compose, I agonize over every sentence, pace the floor in black despair, and stare out the window wondering why I didn't take up plumbing or plowing instead of writing. Consequently, a prolific writer like Gary Allen is to me not only impressive, he intimidates me. Since his first article was published in 1965, Gary has written some 77 articles for American Opinion alone, and has produced 4 books that are monumental, not only because of the research and writing that went into them, but also because of their importance to the cause of liberty and anti-communism in the United States. And in addition to all of that, he's found time to organize and operate his Gary Allen home seminar cassette program, make innumerable speeches and broadcasting appearances, travel tens of thousands of miles, and otherwise lead a full life. And none of his material is thrown together quickly or in haste. He seems to have a genius for the trenchant sentence, a priceless gift for organization, and limitless energy to polish his paragraphs until they say precisely what he means. And the time he must spend on his research. Gary is one of the very few, select few, in the Americanist anti-communist field whose research produces original material. He is not content merely to dig information out of the congressional record, committee reprints, and the mass media. Gary also goes where the action is. He sees events he reports, and he talks to people he writes about. Hence, his material is of importance historically to his general audience and also to his fellow writers, most of whom sooner or later find themselves borrowing a little bit now and then from him. Some of us here have spent a lifetime contending with the great conspiracy against human freedom, and many of us are worn and weary. Yet we realize that most of the major battles are still ahead. That's why it's good to see a man like Gary Allen standing up on the front line, still full of youth and vigor and dauntless determination. By the time they wear him out, the enemies of freedom will have some scars and casualties of their own to moan about. I thank God for Gary Allen and this rally for giving me the privilege of presenting him to you. Gary?
Thank you very much, Dan. Thank you people for your most kind welcome. I love you all. You're my kind of people. That's why I like to be here on the 4th of July, because I like to spend this birthday of our nation with my kind of people. I do consider myself especially fortunate today in that I get to precede Tom Anderson, not follow him. I'd like to relate to you an experience I had a little earlier this year. I met Tom in Nashville, and he took me down to a farm that he is building. And believe me, it was an absolutely unique experience. And I was trying to think of some pseudonyms for the towns that it was near, but the pseudonyms which I came up with are names I sometimes use, like East Overshoe or Burnt Mattress or places like that aren't really as funny as the real towns that Tom's Farm is near. It's located between Turkey Trot, Tennessee and Tick, Tennessee. And it's a most unusual neighborhood. Every family has, it seems, at least 4 cars. Some of them are living in them. The rest serve as giant garbage receptacles. And when they fill the car up with trash, then they get another new car. Now, liberals, of course, would interpret this as being terribly deprived people, slum conditions. But those of us who are conservatives look at this as a gigantic strategic reserve of scrap steel in case there's ever a war. I greatly admire Tom Anderson because he knows more clean jokes than anybody I've ever met. I guess it is a reflection on my character that I only know one joke that is both clean and funny. And I guess I shall tell it here. I'm going to watch the time because 3 weeks ago I spoke in Salt Lake City, and they told me that if I spoke over an hour and 15 minutes, a gigantic seagull would emerge and haul me off by its talons. It seems that there was an international meeting of astronauts being held in Europe, and as with most convention-type things, after the meetings of the day were over, the various representatives of the different countries involved met together to clink a little ice and exchange stories. And after a couple of hours of this, the Russian astronaut said, "I suppose I shouldn't tell you this, but in 1974 we're going to Mars." To which the American astronaut replied, "Well, I suppose I shouldn't tell you this either, but in 1976 we're going to Venus." And at that point, the Polish astronaut chimed in and said, "Well, in 1977 we're going to the sun." And the other astronaut said, "Well, my lord, man, you'll burn up." And the Polish astronaut said, "No, our Polish scientists have got this all figured out. We're going to go at night." I suppose the fact that that is the only decent joke I know is a reflection on my poor breeding. But I always answer by saying it's better than no breeding at all. See, my mother disowned me about 1956, I guess it was. It's been a terrible tragedy. I was invited to a meeting. It was at Stanford University at the time, and I was invited to a party, actually, on a Sunday afternoon at the Chandler residence, the Los Angeles Times, for incoming freshmen. And so the photographer from the LA Times was out there, and they lined a group of us up, and then they came around after they took the picture and got our names. And I gave the photographer a phony name that was a double entendre that I won't go into here. And sort of like, I'm a flake or something like that. Or I leaned over or something like that. But it was a little more than that. And the next morning, I was working at the time, and that summer as a roughneck in the oil fields, which is a place a lot of people think I should still be working. And my father came in laughing to himself with a copy of the society page of the Los Angeles Times, And here's this great big picture of us, and I never thought the name would get by, but it did. And my father didn't seem to mind, but my mother was outside saying, "Oh, the shame of it all. How will I ever face the ladies in the bridge club?" And it really wasn't until this year when I brought out 3 books that I'm back in her good graces, and I'm now my son the author. It's a great honor to be up here with Dan Smoot. I was supposed to have somebody else up here flanking me, my bodyguard Alan Stang, and Stang has been one of my heroes for a long time. He started writing for American Opinion a couple of years before I did, and I remember his great article on Youthont, which has the best beginning of any article I think I've ever read anywhere, and also that great article he did on the new plantation. And so I used to describe my style to people for several years as Neo Stang. But we were going to have him up here, and you know how when the black Muslims speak, or any of the black militants, they have the fruit of Islam standing behind them. Alan, you were supposed to be in the front row so you could get up and flex. Alan, I have to get a little even with him. Yesterday he referred to me as the world's smallest walrus or something. And somebody pointed out on the new issue of this Boston Guide magazine, there's a picture of a walrus on it. And I'm supposed to be in the Stanbar room between 5 and 6 tonight, autographing books. So if you'll bring any of these up, I'll be glad to autograph them. Alan and I, we kind of have a thing between us, because wherever I go in the country on my travels, many people come up and say, "Oh, hello, Mr. Stang." And he has the same problem. They come up and say, "Hello, Mr. Allen," to him. Of course, it's rather ludicrous because our physiques are somewhat different. So today, to have some fun, we decided to switch tags. And mine says Alan Stang, and his says Gary Allen. I've been practicing all day. I've trying to say, "Observe." And I was going to go out. I was going to get a brown suit and a blue shirt, but I refuse to get any of those Tinkerbell shoes he wears. I don't know whether it's the fruit of Islam or whether it's the good fairy or not, but I'm saving that all for Bill Buckley. One funny thing happened to Alan today. This is a true story. A couple of ladies came up to him and said, "Oh, Mr. Allen, we've always wanted to meet you. You look so much younger than your picture." And he said, "Would you like to meet Alan Stang? He's a great big guy." And they said, "No, we've met him before." Alan has been described by Scott Stanley as the world's tallest troll. To which I suggested this morning to Scott that he should be allowed to edit only short stories. He said if I did that, I couldn't edit your tall tales. But Alan is a legitimate troll, and it's a funny thing, really. Alan is an incredibly brave person. I think most of you have probably heard how He was attacked out in Colorado and in New Mexico by Mexican revolutionaries. And you may have heard about the time that Peggy Bear so brilliantly sent him into a high school full of black militants and almost killed him. And Alan didn't flinch at all. The man is enormously brave. But he does have this terrible fear of billy goats. Actually, we refer to him as Super Troll, and he does come from a long line of trolls that go back into antiquity. I'm sure you've all heard of the Dead Sea Trolls. I met the other day to introduce Stang as the ersatz Hilaire du Barrier, and afterwards I told him that, and he objected, saying, I'm studying to be Hilaire du Barrier. When I grow up, that's what I want to be, is Hilaire du Barrier. I think it's, I suppose I should be up here delivering a serious message, but I hope there's a very serious message in my book, which I hope you will all read. And I think it's very important for us to keep our sense of humor, no matter how tough things are, because if you forget how to laugh and you dwell only on how bad things are, you're going to drive yourself right up a tree. And someday they'll come in and you'll be swinging from the chandeliers, and you're going to be in the funny farm. We're lucky out in California. We have a coordinator out there named Baz Gladio, who is sometimes referred to as, who was the comedian, Jimmy, the Irish comedian? Not Jimmy Durante, Jackie Gleason. That's what he refers to, Jackie Gleason, the right wing, and he is an enormously funny guy. Baz has an absolutely great time. In his car, he has a phony microphone. And some of the Love generation will drive by him, and he's got these John Birch Society bumper stickers on the back of his car, and they will walk by and make remarks at him or appropriate signs, and they get ahead of him, and he picks up this microphone like he's reporting them to the police, and they disappear at about 80 miles an hour. One time, he was driving Reverend Freeman Yearling to a speech. Many of you probably know Reverend Yearling from New York. He's a Negro minister, and he is coal black. And this hippie girl drives up beside him in the car, and he's seen this John Birch Society bumper stickers on the back, and she yells out, "You Birchers are nothing but a bunch of dirty fascist pigs." And Reverend Yearling leans over in front of Baz and says, "Yeah, and they hate niggers too." Baz was speaking at St. Francis High School in San Francisco one time a couple of years back, and as he was standing up on stage, a student got up in the audience and threw one of these little rubber balls at him and hit him right in the head. And Baz said, it really shook him. But Baz is pretty quick, so he looks back at the kid and he says, "With aim like that, kid, you ought to be in the Army." And his wife is pretty quick. They had a crank call recently, and the caller says, "Look, I'm a communist, and we're not only going to take over your country, we're going to take over your city, and we're even going to take over your home." And his wife replied, "Are you going to take over the payments too?" But Baz has a great serious philosophy too. I think we all ought to adopt. He has a slogan: "If it ain't Birch, it ain't Birch." Think about that. And those of you who are not at this audience who ain't, why ain't you? You know it's the right thing to do. It is a real honor to share the stage with Dan Smoot. Dan talked a lot about my research, and people come up to me here and they say, gee, do you have a big research staff? And I say, yes, I have a very big one. You're looking at it. But I'm fortunate. Among the volumes of my library, I have 5 or 6 bound volumes of the Dan Smoot reports. I wish I had a complete set. They are absolutely invaluable. And I hope you people appreciate what a debt we owe to this man. Good people. Also, I do get help, whenever I can, and there is a lady in the audience here that's probably been more help to me than anyone else. Her name is Ann Foyer. She's from Indianapolis. Ann, are you out there somewhere? Right back there. Ann sends me large sacks of clippings from the Indianapolis News and the Indianapolis Star, which have probably the 2 best editorial pages of any major newspapers in the United States. But my book, as most of you probably know, deals primarily with the Council on Foreign Relations. And the man that wrote the Bible on the Council on Foreign Relations is Dan Smoot. And it's still the Bible. And if it weren't for Dan Smoot, my book never would have been written. So if my book has been successful, it's because I have stood on the shoulders of a giant. And I want you to know, Dan, how much I appreciate that. This book got started as a speech that I was asked to give before the Republican Women's Club in Long Beach. And I had since seeing some other chart talks, I had designed some of my own charts that I thought expressed some ideas that I wanted to put over. So my book is not the result just of me. It is a result of what I learned from Robert Welch. It is a result, actually, I was telling Scott Stanley about this speech I had, and he said, what are you going to do with it? And I said, well, I don't know. And he said, well, why don't you make a book out of it? Maybe you can write the None Dare Call It Treason of 1972, which I thought was a pretty good idea. And then we happened to be discussing it with Eileen Armour, who is the wife of the governor of the 13 Western States for the Birch Society. And she happened to pop out with, we're talking about John Stormer's book, None Dare Call It Treason, and Eileen said, well, None Dare Call It Conspiracy. I said, that's the title. So I've been very fortunate. A lot of people have contributed to my book. My partner and co-author, Larry Abraham. And besides being up here with Dan Smoot, it's also been a tremendous honor to be at this rally with, I guess everybody has heroes. And I have a trinity of earthly heroes: Robert Welch, Scott Stanley, and John Schmitz. The only bone I have to pick is with Scott Stanley. I've been trying for 2 years. See, I'm a direct descendant of Ethan Allen. And I've been trying to get Ethan Allen on the cover of American Opinion. And he puts on Winslow Homer, the great painter, who I'd never heard of, but we can't get Ethan Allen on. So I'm going to lobby with you people. See, I don't know too many of my ancestors. I've been told that most of them were legitimate, but Ethan Allen was sort of the George Patton of the American Revolution. He won the first battle for the revolutionaries when he took Fort Ticonderoga with a small band of men, and I suppose I'll be in trouble for quoting this, but it's a historical quote. He banged on the door of this British fort at about 5 a.m. in the morning, and the British were inside having an all-night party. And he was a huge man, particularly for that time. He was 6'6". And he banged on the door and yelled, "I demand the surrender of this fort." To which the British officer replied, "In whose name do you demand the surrender of this fort?" And Ethan Allen said, "In the name of the great Jehovah and the Continental Congress." Now, I think that's a man that ought to be on the cover of American Opinion. I've been fortunate to know John Schmitz for 5 or 6 years. And Taylor Caldwell said the other night that what this country needs is more men. If we had more men like John Schmitz, I'll tell you, we wouldn't be in the trouble we're in. John's talking about the possibility of running for the Senate in 1974 in California. I hope with every fiber of my being that he has a bigger job before that. I want to see a Wallace Schmitz ticket in 1972. You know, I think the American people would kind of like to have a guy that can take 438 slugs and then stand up again. I saw in this morning's Herald Traveler some quotes from George Wallace. Many of you may not have read them. I'd like to read them to you. Of Hubert Humphrey, he said, "He's a clown, one of the country's funniest politicians." Of Edmund S. Muskie, he said, "From what I know about him, he's part of the crowd I've been bucking for years." Of Edward M. Kennedy, he said, "He's one of the really pluperfect hypocrites." The governor certainly wasn't over his head in water when he said that. He's more interested in the vanity of his own prestigious career than he is in doing important things. And of George McGovern, he said, "I think he's a tool of the Communist Party." If he had run on his record, a record not everybody knows, he wouldn't have got one delegate. There's a picture of the governor here. And boy, he looks great. He looks like... Folks, I think we got somebody who's ready to fight. You know, Wallace has been a fighter all his life. You know, one of the great untold stories is about Wallace was fighting for, you know, he was a boxer, an excellent boxer, and he was fighting for the Southern Golden Gloves Featherweight Championship back in about 1936, I believe. And the night before the fight, he was very nervous, and he went outside, as people sometimes do when they're that way, to try to walk off some of the nervousness. And he discovered two white men beating up on a Negro. And he didn't like those odds. And he stepped into the fight. He beat up both of the men, but in doing so, he broke his hands. And he fought the next night, but all he could do was defend himself. He couldn't hit because his hands were broken. This is the man that the liberal media has built up as America's foremost racist. I've had some personal experience with the governor. One rather humorous situation. I was down there, well, just a year ago this last week, and I gave the governor the chart talk upon which the book None Dare Call It Conspiracy is based. And the governor and his gracious wife were kind enough to invite us to stay for dinner at the mansion that night, which we did. And of course they have servants in the mansion. And the man who served us the dinner, I thought he was almost like a liberal cliche of an Uncle Tom. Almost, you know, he almost shuffled. And I thought, where did they get this guy? I didn't think there were any like this left anymore. He was so condescending, so gracious, so kind, almost overly so. And it wasn't until after we finished the dinner and had left the mansion that the governor explained to us that the man who I thought was such an Uncle Tom was actually a convicted murderer. And all of the servants at the governor's mansion in Alabama, both men and women, are convicted murderers. They're trustees from the local prison. And this fellow who I thought was such an Uncle Tom, it turned out, had murdered his wife and fed her to the hogs. And the next time that I visited the governor, in the middle of our conversation, which was at the Capitol, he got a phone call from Cornelia saying that the mother of the cook had died, and she was calling from the hospital. She was down there consoling the cook, who was also a convicted murderer. And Governor Wallace excused himself, said he was sorry, but he had to leave as he had to go down and help his wife console the grieving mother, or the grieving cook whose mother had just died. So here is the guy again that we're supposed to believe is a racist who leaves meetings to go consult the servants in the household because they have lost a loved one. I think that tells us worlds and worlds about the character of George Wallace. And probably the interesting thing, if this story were reported, this was never reported, it was reported now in the typical way that the news media twists the truth. They would probably take, not the story is that George Wallace left a meeting to go consult the grieving cook in his mansion, but that George Wallace was seen talking to a bircher. You know, typical of news twisting, the Herald Traveler ran this very good picture of Wallace this morning. The New York Times, instead of running a current picture which shows Wallace looking quite healthy, picked out one of those pictures from 3 or 4 weeks ago when he looked like he'd been dead for a month, and they ran that one this morning. I'd like to make a few comments, if you don't mind, on the news media. I shall try to restrain myself, lest Mrs. McKinney be embarrassed. My book has never been reviewed in any newspaper that I know of. It has been attacked by some newspapers, none of whom try to review or refute the facts. The most prominent attack has come from the New York Times, which put out a story which was reproduced in newspapers not only all across the country, but also that we know of in Australia and in Europe. To give you an idea of how you twist the truth, let me read just a couple of these things. Talking about mailing the book out here. It says, those directing the right-wing propaganda effort are prominent in the activities of the John Birch Society. Now notice, this is not a book of history. It is a right-wing propaganda effort. You never see anything about a left-wing propaganda effort. It would be a liberal book or something like that. It says, Gary Allen, a 35-year-old writer for John Birch Society Publications, is the author. He refused to discuss the sources of or the funding of what he described as a plan to, quote, saturate the country, end quote, with copies of the book before the November election, which, of course, reeks of secret oil money financing this thing. Actually, I didn't think who the stockholders were in Concord Press was any of their business. And so it makes it sound like it's a big secret. Dealing with what it calls an invisible government. Does that ring a bell, Dan? Allegedly controlled by the Council on Foreign Relations, the book contains little that is new. Well, why would you want to read anything if it didn't contain anything new? And it ends by saying, Mr. Allen asserts that Mr. Nixon has, get that, Mr. Allen asserts that Mr. Nixon has allowed the council to obtain a, quote, stranglehold, end quote, on his administration, and has appointed at least 110 members, including Henry A. Kissinger, to important government positions. It sounds like that's an assertion that's totally undocumented, when in the back of the book we have an appendix where they're all listed. So this is how one lies through choice of words. And the title of this thing, it says, Rightus calls Nixon dupe of leftist plot. And so whenever I get interviewed now, they all say, did you accuse Richard Nixon of being a dupe of a leftist plot? And I say, no, I certainly did not. I said he was a member of a leftist plot. I was interviewed 3 times by the New York Times before they came out with this, and the interviews were kind of fun because the guy never questioned anything that was in the book. The thing that really blew his mind was he read in the back about putting out 15 million copies of this, and his attitude was sort of, well, that's not fair. You know, we talk about we're going to go around the media on this. We know we don't get distribution through the normal channels, so we're going to make all the people who are concerned about this country the channels of distribution, and that way the New York Times and their colleagues can't smother it. And this guy seemed to think that was kind of a dirty trick. You know, I wasn't playing the game according to Hoyle. Speaking of Nixon and the Council on Foreign Relations, it's sort of interesting. I had a chance to talk with Congressman John Ashbrook when he was out in California, and he said that during the 1968 campaign, Ashbrook came to him and brought up the subject of the Council on Foreign Relations and said that, as a quote, he said, John, when we get in there, we're going to get rid of all those internationalists and CFR members from the government. So what did he do? He turned around and put 110 of them in, which I think speaks worlds for the veracity of Richard Nixon. The second group that's attacked thy book is the Anti-Defamation League, and I hope that you'll all get this congressional record that's available out here with John Schmitz's answer. They wrote to John Schmitz, it says, quoting part of it here, "The Birch Society's campaign to distribute millions of copies of None Dare Call It Conspiracy is a very serious matter. To which I would say to the ADL, you bet your sweet bippy it is. And it closes by saying, Mr. Schmitz, in the name of human decency and honest scholarship, we urge you to publicly withdraw your name from this book and disassociate yourself from this insidious campaign. Part of what John wrote back to him says, there's not a word in Gary Allen's book which could possibly be construed by any reasonable man as an attack on any religious faith. Rather, he points out repeatedly that the conspirators of our time are dedicated to the destruction of all religious faith. Even for those who do not accept his thesis, the hostility of the dominant forces in the modern world to religion is very obvious and should provide a solid base for cooperation and alliance among all believers as against non-believers. Gary Allen and I and the John Birch Society and many others are ready and eager for such cooperation and alliance. We have not attacked your faith. Why then do you attack us? Of course, the ADL fails to mention that the co-author of my book is Larry Abraham, which would make their scurrilous attack patently absurd. Poor Larry. He gets attacked by the anti-Semites all the time. He said, for 6 years I worked for the Birch Society, and I got letters saying that I was a dirty infiltrator and this and that. He said, now I'm getting attacked as an anti-Semite. I can't win. But if you've been reading the Boston newspapers, you know that the ADL has remained undaunted in attacking the book. And this is a reason why I get a little upset. I spent about 15 or 20 minutes with one of the reporters from the Globe on Saturday, I guess it was, showed him the passages in the book saying that anti-Semitism was a trap and that it was no more fair to blame all Jews for the crimes of the Rothschilds than it is to blame all Baptists for the crimes of the Rockefellers, and went on and on and on and through the whole thing with him. So the next day there's a big story about the ADL attack on my book, and out of all the things I said to this guy, all he put in the paper was, Allen denies the allegation. But how weak can you sound? We've got other great people that have attacked our book. I have here a photocopy of a press release from the Soviet news agency TASS. Listen, I'm in good company. I am hated, reviled, and despised by the New York Times, the ADL, and TASS. June 7th. As presidential elections are approaching in the United States, ultra-rightist forces are stepping up their activities. A book by a certain Gary Allen. Are there more than one? None Dare Call It Conspiracy has been put on the book market. Its author and publisher is a notorious California ultra, closely linked with the pro-Nazi John Birch Society. The writing mainly repeats the hackneyed conjectures of an alleged conspiracy in the USA with the aim of opposing on American simpletons the dictate of the world government, the implication being the Organization of the United Nations. I don't think we implied that. I thought we stated it just about as directly as we could. The book contains numerous fabrications of the threat to American institutions from the outside and intrigues of world communism. By now, this low standard book has been published in already 6 million copies. Their grammar's not very good. That's them, folks, not me. They need Scott Stanley for an editor over there. It is he's not going to go. I don't care what they offer him. He's turned out better offers than that. It is planned to increase the total print of the book to reach 15 million in the nearest future. Huge numbers of books are being sent free to big industrialists and financiers investing millions of dollars into the election campaign of the man of reaction in the forthcoming congressional election. It is also being sent to U.S. brass hats, figures of the right wing of the Republican Party, numerous ultra-reactionary organizations and groups for distribution among the electorate. The aim of the ultra-rightists is to give maximum support to the reaction at this election. The author of this cooking openly said his work is called upon to promote the election to Congress of the candidates acting from the most conservative positions. And that last statement is probably the only true statement in the whole thing. We're now starting to get at least a little outside publicity. Last Monday, a week ago today, Alan Stang, Charlie Smith, Scott Stanley, and myself were on the David Susskind show down in New York. It was taped. It'll be the opening show for the fall season. So you'll see it sometime in September. You'll have to watch your local papers. We don't have any date on it. But we did have a lot of fun. Probably the biggest shocker thing, if you've seen the format, they have two on each side of David Susskind, and you have a little table in front of you with a glass of water on it. And I guess every 10 minutes they break the show where they're going to insert the commercials, and you have a couple of minutes to sort of recuperate. And the second time they broke, I went to get a drink of water, and instead of getting mine, I totally by accident got David Susskind's. And I took a great big swallow, and it was gin. Which was quite a shock. And I told him he was worse than Jackie Gleason. Everybody tells me that I was much more articulate the rest of the show. But, I've always wondered why Jackie Gleason smiles so much on his show. I hope they don't cut this part out, but towards the last, I sort of jumped on Gleason, or not Gleason, on Susskind, and I said, David, I've been watching your show for 12 years, and I've been watching this befuddled bit that you go through. He just doesn't understand. And I said, I hope that listening to Mr. Stang and Mr. Stanley and Mr. Smith, I hope you've learned something. Have you? And he changed the subject. Let me tell you, I think everybody did well on the show, but Charlie Smith was absolutely outstanding. And he really had Susskind choking on his liberal cliches. We're getting a little more publicity for those of you in New York. I'm supposed to be on the Ken Fairchild WMCA radio show tomorrow, and tomorrow night the Barry Farber show. And then Thursday night, I'll be in Rochester, where they have a show on WHAM, which is a clear channel station that goes into 38 states, I'm told. But getting back to some of my impressions on the media, next year when you come to the rally, try to get here that first day and go to the press conference. It's really an incredible experience. Those of us in the John Birch Society believe in less government. But I'm afraid if I could, I would pass one more law. And that would be that every newspaper reporter be required to run his picture beside the newspaper article he writes. I'll tell you, if people could see what freaks most of those guys are, they would not believe anything in the newspapers. I was really had to admire Colonel Bunker. He was the target of a myriad of stupid questions, and he was very kind, very patient with them. Frankly, I'm not exactly a PR man's dream, as you can imagine. And, I've seen this going on so long, I just can't take it anymore. We're casting pearls before swine is what it amounts to in all too many cases. I think it's only right. We ought to be asked tough questions. I don't mind a tough question. But they were just asking stupid questions. Colonel Bunker, do you think Dwight Eisenhower's a communist? It's not that they disagree with our stand. It's also they don't even know what our stand is. And when I got a chance to say a few words, I talked about the time that when I got out of college, when I was a liberal, and I said, like other liberals, I was smug, arrogant, pompous, and an ignorant bigot. And I hope they got the point. I think if I could pat myself on the back, the only difference between us is that I was somewhat intellectually curious and I wasn't intellectually dishonest. And so if you're a liberal and you're curious and you're intellectually dishonest, you're not going to be a liberal very long. But most of these people, I'm afraid, are condemned to perpetual liberalism. One of the really rewarding things about this book has been some of the stories that have come out about its distribution. And I think everybody has a set of stories, and I'd just like to run through a few of them. I was told yesterday about a lady in Illinois who had the book left on her doorstep, and the fellow that had left it there was partway down the street going to the next house, and the lady came out and ran down and fetched this guy back and had him come in and talk to her. And she was very entranced with the book, and she read it. It turned out that she was an 8th grade teacher, and the next week she went into the local American Opinion library, bought $68 worth of books, of which included a case of the Nunn-Dare-Culloch conspiracy. And as her 8th grade students came the last day of school for graduation, she closed the doors and said, "I'm going to give you a book that the establishment does not want you to read. You can't get this book at even the biggest bookstore in Chicago." And with that, she passed out a copy of the book to every member of her graduating class. She has also become a member of the John Birch Society. Then we had a letter. One of the first really good letters we got was from a couple, also from Illinois, but they were down in Florida on their vacation back at the time when there was still snow on the ground. And it was written on hotel stationery, and she was writing it from the beach. And she said, "We read your book when we got down here. We have decided to cut our vacation short by 2 days and go back home and spend the money we would have spent on the hotel bills and buying Nunn-Dare-Culloch Conspiracy for distribution." That's the kind of stories that really make it worthwhile to be involved in this. We had another letter from the wife of one of the printers in the printing plant in Buffalo, New York, where the book is printed. And she said, "My husband smuggled a copy of the Galleys. Galleys are the pre-page proofs. Smuggled a copy of the Galleys out so that we could read it. And we have read your book, and we have decided to dedicate the rest of our lives to destroying the conspiracy you describe in the book." We had another experience at a picnic in California a couple of months ago, and a student from the University of California at Berkeley came up and told us that he had just set up a booth at the Sather Gate area in front of the school there to sell None Dare Call It Conspiracy to his other students. And one of the, I think, good things about this book is you can even give this to radicals, and if they're honest, they will understand how they've been used. But he says, "I'm having great luck with this book." He says, "I give it to all my SDS friends." And he says, what I tell them is this, is you told me that the Rockefellers control all the industry in this country, and that they control the Federal Reserve, and they control the economy, and they control the politics, and you said the only answer was communism. Well, I've got bad news for you. They control that too. And then on a conference of the Mormon Church held a couple of months ago and broadcast by radio around the world, the man we're going to honor tonight, Ezra Taft Benson, said this to this conference: "There is no conspiracy theory in the Book of Mormon. It is a conspiracy of fact. And along this line, I would highly recommend to you the book None Dare Call It Conspiracy by Gary Allen." I sure want to thank Elder Benson for that plug before that group. Then we had another letter. It said in part, "If Americans can be awakened to the progressive loss of their freedoms, None Dare Call It Conspiracy is the book can open their eyes to the reality of the situation as it exists." Signed, Stanley J. Tracy, retired Assistant Director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Now this one's really going to blow your minds. And this is not a put-on, this is real. "Dear Mr. Polizzi," this is to Mr. Thomas Polizzi, "many thanks for transporting us from Bronxville to New York. Also, many thanks for giving us copies of None Dare Call It Conspiracy. Sincerely, Martha Mitchell." Now, whether Martha Mitchell demanding that her husband get out of corrupt politics is a cause and effect of this book, I don't know. But this letter is dated May 10th, and anyway, it happened. We've had some response also from royalty on this. As those of you who have read the book know that we delve into the organization called the Bilderbergers, which is headed or started by His Royal Highness Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands. And somebody wrote a letter to Prince Bernhard asking him if all this stuff was true. And he wrote, or an assistant wrote back, "His Royal Highness, the Prince of the Netherlands, requests me to thank you for your letter of April 1st, which I'm sure he really appreciated getting. That's like, you know, you get these letters from these congressmen, you write these left-wing congressmen about something, and they say, gee, we sure appreciate your interest. You get these. That's like, you know, the Nixon family motto is, Be sincere whether you mean it or not. The data in the American writings regarding the Bilderberg meetings are not even in any relationship whatsoever with the reality. His Royal Highness, or His Royal Jackass, is therefore of the opinion that any comment is superfluous. It would itself be piquant, whatever that means, when after the displeasure of the extreme left regarding the Bilderberg, now a piece appears in which it is made clear that the Prince is engaged in delivering up the West to the Soviet Union. Furthermore, the Bilderberg meetings are regularly attended by representatives of the press and radio, and there is always a press conference during which the names of the participants and the subjects are being stated. Yours very respectfully, E. Vernande. Which, of course, I was quoting in the book from a reporter who tried to get into the Bilderberg meetings and couldn't get in. Now here's probably the classic of all. This is to Mrs. Helen Thayer in Madison, Wisconsin. Thank you for your letter letting me know of your concern over the organization, the Council on Foreign Relations. I have checked with the Library of Congress on this matter, and to the best of my knowledge, there is no such organization. Best wishes, sincerely, William Proxmire. So I guess, folks, there's no need to worry. There is no such organization. I noticed at the group out here that's selling all the bumper stickers, they've been kind enough to put out a bumper sticker that says, "Have you read an undercolor conspiracy?" which I hope you'll all get and plaster your cars with as you go home. I came up with a rather unique way of using these before I came back here. I put it on my chest and went to the beach. But boy, does it smart when you take them off. You know, I think the next 4 months may be very crucial in the survival of the United States. I think it's time for us to wire down the throttle. A lot of people are in despair, but I would remind you that things never looked worse than they looked at Valley Forge. I hope that now that with the help that's been given to me by Mr. Welch and John Schmitz and Scott Stanley and Larry Abraham, that we've put together a book that is a weapon with which we can counterattack. We hope to make every one of you a book distributor, because nobody else is going to distribute this book. We're not going to get help from the newsstands or from anybody else. What we want you to do is get this book out to everyone you know, and then get on the phone and see how many books you can sell them. And you'd be amazed, if you really work at it, every one of you could sell at least 1,000 books between now and the election. We're trying to upgrade your thinking. The only way we can get a geometric progression going and get enough of these books out to really do the job is if you follow up on the people you get to read the book. You've got to get them to in turn become book pushers. We've talked to numerous people in parts of the country that have even gone door to door selling this book. And the worst sales percentage that I've heard is 25%. But if you can sell one book for every 4 doors that you bang on, that is well worthwhile. And some people, particularly young people, are doing much better than that. There are a number of teenagers across the country that go out and bang on the door and say, look, we're concerned with what's happening in our country. And most young people don't know what's going on, but we do, and we would like you to read this book. And these people are selling half to 2/3 of the people they talk to on this basis. And I've talked to Jim Todd, who's the coordinator in New Hampshire, where we put 120,000 copies into New Hampshire before the primaries, and he's swimming in prospects. You know, I really believe this, and I think you people all know it, that Big Brother is about to put his boot on our neck. Now, I don't know what your reaction to that is, but I'll tell you what mine is. If some son of a gun puts his boot on my neck, I'm going to reach up and try to bite his ankle. More than that, if I can, I'm going to take a knife and I'm going to try to sever his Achilles tendon. Because it doesn't make any difference how big and how strong he is. If you sever his Achilles tendon, he can't walk. And I think with none dare call it conspiracy, we have a knife that we can cut the conspiracy's Achilles tendon. And we can do it in the next 4 months. So I will close by asking you the question that's asked in one of our films. Are you ready to march? Thank you.